Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you guys how to make this amazing 3-tier Angry Birds cake with red on the bottom, Chuck in the middle, and the king pig on top. To get started, I have two 8.5-inch round cake pans and two 10-inch round cake pans. And I also have an 8-inch dome bowl. And I lined all of them with parchment paper. This is going to be a marble cake, so I have some chocolate cake batter and some vanilla cake batter. To get the marble effect on the cake, you want to start with one of the batters. I'm starting with my vanilla cake batter, and one of your batters has to be a little more loose than the other one. My vanilla cake batter always comes out thicker, and my chocolate cake batter comes out more loose. So I'm going to add some vanilla, then chocolate, then vanilla, then chocolate, and then you want to use a toothpick or a skewer or any tool that has a sharp end to swirl the batters together. And you want to make sure that they're swirled so that you see both colors. Once I finished swirling my marble cake batters, they look like this, and I'm going to bake these in the oven at 350 degrees. Now, since the cake pans are all different sizes, they're going to take different times to bake. The smaller ones took about 25 minutes to bake, the bigger round cake pans took about 30 minutes to bake, and the dome bowl took about an hour to bake. After the cakes have cooled for at least an hour, I'm going to remove them from the cake pans and remove the parchment paper from each one. Then I'm going to begin to level them. So I like to cut off that dome, what I like to call muffin top shape, off the top of each cake so that we have a flat surface so that we get a nice leveled cake. Once our cakes have been leveled, we're going to torte them, which means that we're going to cut each layer in half. And this is typically best if your layers are 2 inches high, so when you cut them in half, each layer is 1 inch. Now we're going to start stacking and filling our cakes. So I'm going to add some buttercream to a cake board and add my first cake layer. And the reason why I add buttercream is so that the cake sticks to the cake board and does not slide. Then I'm going to add some simple syrup to my cakes to keep them moist. I'm going to fill them and stack them on top of one another. And I'm going to repeat this for all my cakes until I reach the top and they're ready for their crumb coat. Now for the dome bowl cake, I'm only going to cut this one in half one time. The layers are going to be pretty thick, but I'm going to add enough simple syrup to keep it nice and moist. Then I'm going to fill it and also give this a crumb coat. Once my cakes have chilled in the refrigerator, I go ahead and give them a second coat of buttercream. Now I'm going to add dowels to my bottom and middle cake layers so that the other cake layers on top of them have support and don't sink through the cake. After I've added the supports to my cakes, I'm going to cover them in fondant. For the first layer, which is the 10.5-inch cakes, I am rolling out some red fondant, and this is going to be for Red, which is the main character from the Angry Birds movie. So I roll out my red fondant onto my rolling pin, I grab my cake and unroll the fondant over the cake. Then I use my hands and a fondant smoother to smooth out the top and sides of the cake. Using my handy pizza cutter, I trim off the excess fondant from the bottom of the cake. Now we're going to add details to Red. So I've cut out a half white circle, and this is going to be his chest part, and I'm placing that in the center of the cake. Now I'm adding a black thin band around the top part of the half circle. Now to make Red's eyes, I've cut out 2 circles and I'm adding 2 small pupils, and I'm going to cut a straight line at the bottom of each eye. Now I'm going to place the eyes right above that thin black line that we made above the half circle, and his eyes are pretty close together. They're not too far spaced apart. Now to make his really thick eyebrows, I have some black fondant here, and I'm going to create a kind of slanted, thick V shape so that, you know, when you make a V shape on the eyebrows, it makes you look angry. Well, that's what I'm trying to achieve here. Now I add the eyebrow to the top of the eyes, and I want to make sure that it covers just part of the top of the eye so that he really looks angry. I've cut some really thin strips of fondant, and I am adding those to the outline of the eyes just to add a little more depth to the eyes. To make the beak, I have some orange modeling chocolate, and I'm going to roll out a really thick and small cone shape. Then I'm going to insert a lollipop stick into it, and I'm going to let that set. I'm going to skip the second layer real quick, and I'm moving on to the very top layer, which is the dome cake, and this is going to be the king pig. So I rolled out my green fondant, and I'm going to cover the dome cake with this. Once again, I'm using my hands and a fondant smoother to make the fondant stick to the buttercream and smooth the cake around. And I'm trimming off the extra fondant from the bottom. I'm using two different shades of modeling chocolate. I have a light green modeling chocolate and a yellowish lighter green modeling chocolate, and I'm just free-forming the shape of the king pig's ears. Using a lollipop stick and a little bit of melted candy melt as glue, I'm adding the green lighter part to the darker green, and this is going to add more dimension to the ear. And you want to let those set for a few minutes. To make the rest of King Pig's facial features, I'm using modeling chocolate, and I'm using that lighter one to create a ball shape, and I'm going to flatten it out so it's going to be a little more flat and a little more oval, and I'm placing that in the center of his face to be the nose. Using the end of one of my paintbrushes, I'm going to basically carve into the modeling chocolate to make that indented nostril shape. And his left nostril is bigger than his right nostril, so I'm going to recreate that. Using the same technique I used to carve in the nostrils, I'm going to carve in that really grim grin that he has on his face. And using some white fondant, I am going to add his little teeth. With some white modeling chocolate and a candle holder that I'm using as a cutter, which was the exact size that I needed it to be, I am cutting out the eyeballs of the king pig. Then using some melted candy melts, I am gluing these onto his face, and his eyes are really far spaced apart. Now I'm rolling out a thin modeling chocolate tube, which is going to be a ring that he has around his eyes to make it look kind of like those bags that he has around his eyes. And I made some really thin little snake tubes to be his eyebrows. Now I'm adding on his pupils, and you want to make sure they're kind of far spaced apart because he is pretty cockeyed. And now that the ears have set, I'm going to insert those to the side of his head. And both of his ears point only to one side of his head, so he has two ears on one side of his head. I used more melted candy melt as a glue to stick those on. Since he is the kingpin, he wears the crown, so we're going to make that cute little crown that he has on the other side of his head. So I'm using some white modeling chocolate, and I'm just going to roll out a tube and cut out some little triangle shapes and roll it into a small crown. Once again, I'm using melted candy melt as a glue here, and I'm going to hold this in place, and then I'm going to put it in the refrigerator to set. Once the crown has been finished, I am going to add some melted candy melts to the bottom of the crown. This is going to be the glue, as it has been for everything else in the cake. And I'm going to place this right on the side of his head, and I'm going to hold it in place for about 30 seconds. Then I'm going to pop the whole cake in the refrigerator to set completely. So now that we finished the top layer, which was the king pig, we're going to move back to the middle layer, which is going to be Chuck. Chuck is the yellow Angry Bird. So I'm rolling out some yellow fondant, and I'm going to cover my 8.5-inch cake in this yellow fondant. Now that I've finished covering my middle layer, I've added it onto the bottom layer, and now I'm going to add the king pig to the very top. But before I do that, I am adding a border. I've made a little rope border to the bottom of the yellow cake layer because I did not like that gap in between the layers. So I'm just adding this rope border, and then I'm going to add the king pig on top. And I have not added the details to Chuck's face yet because I did not want to ruin the fondant decorations of his face as I shifted him around and added the layers on top of one another. Now I'm inserting a dowel rod in the center of the cake, and I'm going to add the king pig on top. Now to finally finish off the cake, we're going to add Chuck's facial details. So I'm going to add a little half circle, just like we did with red, and this is going to be his chest. Now I'm adding on his eyes, which are just a round shape, and his pupils are smaller than Red's, and his eyes are more far apart. Also, I made a small tube under his eye, and I'm placing his beak right in the center under his eyes. I made an eyebrow just like the one that I made for Red, and I actually made this one the color red, but this one is more rounded, and I'm going to place this right above his eyes. And to finish him off, using some black fondant, I created some little hair strands that I'm going to place right in the center of his eyebrow. And this amazing Angry Birds cake is complete. All 3 layers, Red, Chuck, and the king pig. The beaks, the ears, and the crown all add beautiful finishing touches to the cake. It's colorful, it's wonderful, the characters truly pop. I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial on how to make this wonderful Angry Birds cake. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye bye.